As far as the investigations into the AI171 crash continues, this is of course after the release of the preliminary report by the AAIB. Now, after foreign media have cited a cockpit recording of a dialogue between the two pilots of the AI-17 flight that crashed last month, they seem to be indicating, and this is the foreign media that we're talking about, they're floating a particular theory accusing the captain of cutting the flow of fuel to the plane's engines. Now, the Pilot Association in India has taken exception to the so-called theory being floated by sections of the Western media, and they've hit out at what they describe as a selective approach on the part of the foreign media. Let me go across to my colleague Hina for more on this. Hina, take us through the details that have now been accessed with respect to the Pilots Association here in India, taking serious exception to what they describe as motivated as well as selective reportage in the Western media, blaming the pilots for what happened aboard AI171.
Well, that's right, Siddharth. You know, what is important to note here is that why these conspiracy theories are floating around. And the sole reason is what is mentioned in the AAIB's preliminary report. And here in this case, AAIB needs to answer. The Ministry of Civil Aviation also needs to be transparent as far as the probe is concerned. Because here in this preliminary report, I want to read out what exactly was that one line that is leading to these kind of speculations, not just in India, but across the world. The line said, as per the report, in the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? The other pilot responded that he did not do so. Now, this particular paraphrasing of the conversation between both the pilots that's mentioned in this report has actually fueled speculations. And this is the reason why the airport, investigation bureau as well as Ministry of Civil Aviation needs to come out clean and be transparent about it. Why is it wrong at multiple levels? One, it does not give us details of what was the exact conversation, because the cockpit voice recorder, as per our sources, has given them much more than just this part that has been paraphrased and put into this particular report. So why have they not released the entire conversation verbatim for us to conclude what perhaps was happening in the cockpit just before they declared Mayday? Point number two that needs to be highlighted is that why have they not mentioned in this particular report as to which pilot, in fact, said that, which pilot specifically asked, why did you cut off? And which pilot, in a way, responded saying, I did not. So there is confusion on that aspect as well. Global media from day one has been using this selective aspect of this particular report, how selectively things have been put in this report, to only point to one thing, that there was pilot error that was involved here. And that is the reason why we've been trying to reach out to Ministry of Civil Aviation, AAIB, to get some answers. Now the pilot body has also rejected these kind of reports, this selective commentary, the speculation that's going on, saying that, you know, it is irresponsible because we do not really have complete information. The entire country today is waiting for answers because we have lost 260 people. We need to know what really went wrong in the last few moments. And if these kind of things are being reported globally, it is now important that the government comes out with some specific answers. And second, an important aspect that I would like to highlight here, Siddharth, is that why, in a way, AAIB jumped to give a clean chit to Boeing, the plane manufacturer, in this case, when in the past as well, a similar incident has been reported in 2019, where pilots never touched the fuel switches. They transitioned to the cutoff mode on their own. There was a software glitch that was reported in 2019. That incident took place earlier. So when at that time, and by the way, it was the same Boeing Dreamliner which reported a similar kind of an issue that led to the dual engine failure there. So if that has happened in the past, why are we ruling that out in this particular case? That is another question that needs to be answered.
Absolutely, Hina, very pertinent questions that you've raised. We're also joined by Sabyasachi, but the excerpt of the preliminary report, when recalling the conversation between the two pilots, it basically says, why did you cut off? And the other pilot says, I did not. It does not specifically refer to the fuel switch in that particular conversation. Lots of questions as a result of that preliminary report. Now, the Pilots Association has also not just slammed the preliminary report, but also, of course, questioned what they describe as a selective approach on the part of certain sections, particularly of the Western media, in the manner in which that preliminary report has been interpreted. Let's in fact take you through certain excerpts from the letter that they've now dispatched complaining about the selective approach. They've said that this particular approach ends up assigning blame before the thorough probe is completed and therefore is irresponsible and premature. It also says that the AAIB report lacks comprehensive data, that it is relying selectively on paraphrased CVRs to suggest a pilot error. At least that appears to be the implication according to the interpretation of the Pilots Association. They've also said that there's speculative commentary which ends up undermining trained crew members. This is, of course, from the Federation of Indian Pilots. Let me go across to Sabyasachi now for more on this. Sabyasachi, absolute outrage among the Pilots Association here in India over the interpretation of the preliminary report that's been issued by the AAIB, as well as what they perceive are certain incorrect implications that the report has also made about the role and responsibility of the pilots.
Well, that's right, Siddharth. See, from the very day one itself, when the preliminary report has come out in public, the Western media and the Western aviation experts continuously pointed fingers towards the pilot, stating that the fatal accident happened because of pilot error, because of human error, and under no circumstances the switch cannot go to cut off automatically. Now, time and again in the report itself, what important point has been mentioned is that back in 2018 itself, when one of the advisory was issued by a US aviation regulator regarding the disengagement of the fuel switch. Now, at that particular time, since it was an advisory, it was not made a mandatory check by the Indian air regulators, whether it is Air India, Indigo, Akasa or other air regulators. Now, after this, we had seen that the airlines back home had started a thorough check of the fuel control switch as well. Now, time and again, the pilot body has emphasized that the preliminary report which has been issued by the investigators are not concrete and not comprehensive. So at this particular time, to speculate and directly blame the pilots is not done. In fact, they have clearly stated that the pilots are highly experienced, and by speculations that are going around will create doubt on the professionalism of the highly trained pilots, as well as create distress among their family members. Now, the pilot body also emphasized that they are just relying on the cockpit voice recorder, whereas for the actual report to come in, it's going to take about a year's time.
There's almost 2 hours of audio conversation that has been recovered, Sabyasachi, and in the interest of transparency, those entire 2 hours need to be released. That's the demand that's also being made. But let me go across to Hina, who raised a very, very important point indeed when we last spoke. Now, Hina, you talked about a precedent from the past, from the year 2019, also aboard a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. So the same model of the aircraft that eventually, of course, crashed on the 12th of June last year, AI171. Now, this, of course, happened in a different part of the world. Take us through exactly what happened and why it is premature and absolutely wrong to be blaming the pilots for what is being interpreted in some sections of the media as a manual error. What happened in 2019 was a software error. Please tell us about what exactly happened and why, therefore, it is all the more important to remember that particular example.
That's right, Siddharth. So like, in the past few days also, we have been discussing the problems involving Boeing 787. The Dreamliner, they are not new. There have been several problems in the past as well. It has faced troubles, and that is the reason why questions today are being asked as to why no recommendation was made for Boeing, the plane maker here, and the engine maker GE in this particular case. You asked me to elaborate on the specific incident that I cited from the year 2019. So it was All Nippon Airways flight in 2019. It was also a Boeing Dreamliner, the same model of Boeing aircraft that crashed in Ahmedabad last month. Now, the only difference was that in Ahmedabad's case, the plane was taking off and then it suffered dual engine failure. The fuel switch transitioned from run to cutoff position. However, what happened in 2019, the scenario was slightly different. The plane was on its final approach. It was about to land, and that's the reason why there wasn't any disaster that took place. So let me tell you what happened. There was no pilot involvement in cutting off the fuel whatsoever as per the report. In fact, there was a software glitch that led to Boeing 787 aircraft, that particular model, seeing the fuel switch transitioning to the cutoff position. So that is the reason why thrust control malfunction accommodation system, or TCMA, cut the supply of fuel to the engines. There was a dual engine failure at that time as well, and it was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. At that time, the pilot error was not the reason. The investigation happened, and it came out that pilots were not responsible. It was in fact a software glitch that cut off the supply of fuel to the engines. So that's the point that I'm trying to make here. When something like this with a similar model has happened in 2019, why is it being ruled out in this particular plane crash? Why full details are not being put in the reports that are being released? Why is there no clarification coming in on only, why a specific excerpt of this conversation between two pilots was put in this particular report? Now, this is something the ministry will have to answer. This is something that the AAIB will also have to tell us about.
Absolutely, Hina. Let me, in fact, take this across to Mr. Surjit Panesar, aviation expert, also joining us. Mr. Panesar, thank you for speaking to Times Now. Now, Hina recalled a very important incident from 6 years ago where a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, when it was about to land, as a result of a software glitch, that's when the fuel switch was cut off, not as a result of any manual intervention, but because of a software error. Now, what's happened in AI171, we're yet to ascertain exactly the circumstances in which the plane crashed. But don't you think it is premature to be ascribing blame on the pilots, where it is quite possible that as a result of a software glitch, the fuel switch can actually be turned off as well, sir?
Let me tell you at the outset, it is the Boeing company who has to answer all these questions. Why they are not being answered these questions? Who's AIB? What expertise they have it? They don't have any expertise, and it is not digestible. The pilots will put the switches off just after takeoff. Now, if the Boeing is a very powerful lobby, they would like to shut their mouth against the Boeing company, and they would like the pilots to blame. Because if the blame comes against the Boeing company, it will be the death knell for this company. Because so many Boeing flying people start refusing to fly by 787, and the Boeing company has to be closed down. They are using all their powers to tell people it's the pilot's fault. That is the normal tradition. Whenever a pilot dies, they put the blame on the pilot. Because he's not going to come out of the ashes of the grave to tell you, I have not done this thing. Only the AIB, which is starting the Manor Kania, inexperienced people, it is the Boeing company who has to answer this thing. How did RAT came in? Was it electrical glitch or what has happened? How the engine failed? It is only the Boeing company and General Electric company responsible to answer all these questions. And it is pointless to ask the inexperienced people who have never flown the aircraft. Neither their AIB has involved any engineer or pilot from 787. How they are coming out to these conclusions? It's a matter of great regret and concern that because they have decided to blame the pilot only. That's all.
Absolutely. Boeing also needs to come clean. And also, of course, AIB needs to be asked as to why there was no action prescribed against Boeing and no recommendations made in that preliminary report that was released. Many thanks, Mr. Panesar, for your